My name is Alex, and I've been an emergency medical technician for over 10 years, primarily serving in the suburban regions of Alabama. I've experienced moments so heartbreaking that I often question how I'm still coping. Every shift serves as a reminder that the harshness of reality is something you never truly acclimate to. I frequently encounter victims of accidents, altercations, and various medical crises. However, there are times when the events we face seem to defy explanation. Instead of solely confronting human suffering, you find yourself caught up in occurrences that are beyond comprehension. This tale is one I wish I could erase from my mind, but every time I try to bury it, something nudges it back to the forefront of my thoughts. It was in 2021 during a night shift that originally seemed like it would be uneventful. The heat was oppressive. Even though it was well past 10 p.m., my teammates and I were at the station, ensuring we had all the essential equipment. Oxygen tanks, medicine, bandages, neck braces, and splints. As paramedics, we know that a person's life can hinge on our promptness and proficiency, so we always need to be prepared for any emergency. That night, the last thing I expected was to encounter something with no medical or earthly explanation. We received a dispatch call about a serious car wreck on a seldom-traveled stretch of highway. From the description, we could tell it was more than just an ordinary collision. They spoke of a vehicle that had crashed into a barrier, seemingly at full speed. Without hesitation, we switched on the sirens and sped towards the scene. It was after midnight, and the road was nearly deserted. Through the ambulance windshield, we could see nothing but shadows and the faint glimmer of distant lights. A shiver ran down my spine, and I couldn't tell if it was due to the cold air conditioning or an unsettling premonition that something terrible awaited us that night. Upon arrival, everything seemed eerily quiet, except for the blue light from a police car that flickered and illuminated the scene. The officers signaled for us to approach. We parked the ambulance, and I stepped out with my colleagues, Jack and Lisa. The scene was desolate. A silver sedan was nearly split in half, its front end crash-landed against the metal barrier. There were no other emergency personnel in sight, indicating that we were the first responders on the scene. The officers approached us with expressions of confusion. One of them, his voice shaking, explained that they hadn't seen who was driving, as the vehicle was already in that condition, smoking and with its lights flashing when they arrived. They had looked through the broken windows, but the deformation of the chassis was such that they could barely make out a body trapped in the twisted metal. The other officer insisted that he had seen a hand move as if there was someone alive, but he wasn't sure. It was difficult to know if it was just his impression or if there really was a survivor. Jack and I cautiously approached the front part while Laura prepared the stretcher and equipment to extract possible injured people. The image was devastating. The driver was trapped, his body twisted between the pedals and the seat. I don't want to go into gruesome details, but seeing a person in that state always turns your stomach, no matter how much experience you have. The worst moment is when you notice they're no longer breathing and confirm there's no pulse. At that moment, you understand that nothing more can be done except to report the death. We soon realized he wasn't by himself. There was a passenger in the back seat. Strangely, the back door appeared to be less damaged, suggesting that the main impact had affected the front of the vehicle more severely. The woman was in critical condition, with visible fractures and a pale complexion that sent chills down my spine. We rushed to assist her, but she was unresponsive. Checking for vital signs, I pressed my fingers against her neck and felt a faint pulse. I called out to Jack for an urgent stretcher. With Laura's assistance, we carefully extracted her, taking great care to avoid aggravating her injuries. The officer who had summoned us looked on, astonished, as if he couldn't believe that someone could have survived such a horrific crash. Then, something unexpected happened. The woman opened her eyes and stared at me in utter fear, muttering a string of words that I couldn't comprehend. Perhaps it was the shock that caused her delirium, but it sent a shiver through me. It felt as though she was whispering something in a language I didn't recognize. I tried to soothe her, urging her to stay awake, even if she couldn't comprehend my words, hoping to keep her alert. However, her breathing grew erratic, and she started to tremble. Despite our attempts to stabilize her, she stopped breathing. I will never forget the frozen expression on her face. That mixture of horror and suffering that doesn't correspond with the typical expression of pain from an accident victim. It was something that, at that moment, I couldn't describe. When Ness discovered something that left us in disbelief while inspecting the back of the car to make sure there were no more victims, the horror started to grow. Beneath the seat, tied with a red ribbon, was a sort of rag doll. My initial assumption was that it might be something sentimental or a possession of the woman. But when we removed it, we discovered a foul odor that seemed to emanate from a dead animal. The doll was crude and had brownish stains and shoddy seams. The patrol car's sporadic light and the darkness made it clear to me that these stains weren't just regular dirt stains. They were a far more unsettling thing. Ernest and I carefully opened the doll while wearing gloves to discover why it smelled so awful. Then the worst happened. A tiny plastic bottle containing a rolled-up piece of paper was found inside the rat. Despite my nearly overwhelming disgust, I persisted out of curiosity and a responsibility to inform the authorities of any pertinent discoveries. We were able to identify a few English words as we unfolded the paper. "You and anyone who dares to be with you are cursed. You will pay for what you did to me with blood, and my retaliation will be your suffering." Finally, there were 2 small photos of the man and woman, a sort of signature, and some words that appeared to be in an unidentified language. Laura approached after observing our responses. We all 3 stood in silence, feeling the same sense of horror and incredulity. It appeared to be a witchcraft ceremony, a curse specifically aimed at those 2 victims. I've seen it all in my years as a paramedic. There are people who come with terrible accidents and severe injuries, but this was something else entirely. Something more serious than a simple traffic accident seemed to be at risk, and I felt a shiver go down my spine. It was the concrete proof that evil deeds do exist and can, in some way, lead to catastrophes like that one. More patrol cars and another ambulance came to our aid a few minutes later. Everything that occurred was noted by the authorities. They accepted the macabre finding as proof when we presented it to them, but you could see the same look of unease and skepticism on their faces. They were aware that they couldn't officially hold anyone accountable for something so ethereally evil. One of the cops, who appeared to have more experience with such cases, merely instructed us to turn over the doll and the evidence for the investigation, and if we wished, to offer prayers for protection. It was the first time an officer had recommended that I pray following a discovery at an accident scene, and it made my blood freeze. We had a lump in our throats when we got back to the hospital base. Without exchanging words, we exchanged glances as we considered whether the crash had actually been caused by a spell or a curse. Perhaps there was something more that we were unable to adequately describe in medical terms, or perhaps the tire had burst for more trivial reasons. Even now, when I think about it, my stomach turns. As the weeks went by, we found out that the deceased had only been married for a few months, according to the police, and that there had been rumors of an ex-partner of the man who had not come to terms with the split. I'm not sure how much of those rumors are true, but one thing is for sure. The victim's name was on that damned paper, and it threatened him and his new wife. I was persuaded that it wasn't a coincidence by that alone. No, the alleged ex could be officially blamed. The evidence was insufficiently strong to convict her. As a tragic car accident, the case was closed, but the memory of it stuck with us as more than just an emergency service. I found the months that followed to be unsettling. I felt like I was reliving that scene each time I got a nighttime accident notification. I was really troubled by the thought of discovering another doll or any evidence of a curse. I began to have nightmares in which I was stuck with that disgusting doll in that ambulance. Occasionally, in my dreams, the woman would resurrect and gaze at me with wide eyes, requesting that I perform an impossible task for her. I've attended several therapy sessions in an attempt to make sense of what transpired that evening. But the weight I carry inside is totally lifted when I don't even discuss it. Nevertheless, we paramedics are forced to proceed. We can't just go to our houses and hide from the things that scare us. Even when fear infiltrates the workplace, our vocation is to help. Nevertheless, I will admit that ever since then, every patient who boards my ambulance has made me consider how flimsy the boundary between life and death is, and how unidentified forces might be pulling the strings when we least expect them. In spite of everything, I never came across anything as macabre as that doll again. Maybe it's a part of the weight I bear because I've witnessed the worst of human tragedy. Ultimately, I would like to share this so that people who read my testimony will realize that some pains cannot be alleviated by a straightforward medical solution. Although you endure physical pain in this line of work, you occasionally encounter circumstances that defy reason. I carry an enduring scar from that accident with me throughout every night shift. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can see that woman's eyes again, and I get the impression that she is pleading with me for assistance from a place that is out of our reach. I have no intention of converting anyone to Christianity. However, I do want to caution that there are stories that linger in your memory more deeply than a tragic incident, both in America and around the world. Certain wounds can be treated with medication or are not visible on clinical examinations. When you experience horrors on any shift that go beyond what is reasonable, you develop these scars on your soul. I've been serving as a paramedic in Tucson, Arizona for over 11 years. Throughout my career, I've witnessed heartbreaking accidents and moments where life hangs by a thread. However, nothing compares to the experience I had a few months ago during a night shift that will forever be etched in my memory. That night, I felt an eerie sense of foreboding that I couldn't explain. A knot formed in my stomach every time the radio broke the silence in the ambulance. Everything seemed ordinary, yet there was something in the air that kept me on edge. A slight tremor ran through my hands. It was unusually cold, and my partner Tom was driving as we navigated the nearly deserted streets. Around 2 a.m., we received a call for assistance that felt different from the usual distress calls. A nervous, shaky voice could barely articulate the urgent need for an ambulance at a house on the outskirts of the city. The dispatcher managed to grasp that there were 2 people unconscious, and the young man calling sounded desperate. He offered no additional details other than that we needed to hurry because, in his words, the worst had already occurred. The moment we heard that, we sprang into action. Few times have I felt such a pressing need to arrive at a scene without knowing the specifics of what awaited us. We took the fastest route, maneuvering around curves and potholes at high speed. The road became increasingly desolate. The city lights faded behind us, replaced by the darkness of scrubland and abandoned lots. Suddenly, amid the gloom, the house came into view. Its walls were peeling, and the roof sagged as if it were on the verge of collapse. The front yard was littered with rusted tires, discarded car doors, and broken furniture. A junkyard rather than a home. As we exited the ambulance, the night was so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. We approached the front door cautiously. Tom knocked twice, and eventually it creaked open. A young man stood there, trembling, his eyes wide, and his clothes were dirty and threadbare. He wore an oversized sweater, and a thin layer of grime covered his face. The foul smell that wafted out twisted my stomach, a mix of rotting garbage and something else I couldn't quite identify. With a quivering voice, the boy murmured that he didn't want us to take his parents away. They had to stay with him. A chilling wave ran down my spine at the almost feral desperation in his gaze. I gently explained that we could help if he would show us where his parents were. He didn't respond. Instead, he muttered incoherent phrases and slowly raised an arm to point towards the staircase leading to the second floor. Without thinking, I grabbed the trauma bag and ascended the stairs, expecting to find 2 severely injured individuals. With each step, the stench grew stronger, becoming almost overwhelming. I fought hard to maintain my composure. Tom followed, but by the time I reached the landing, I realized he had lagged behind, equally repulsed by the foul air. The hallway upstairs was dimly lit by the soft glow of a street lamp filtering through a broken window. I moved toward the first room. The door stood ajar. I gently pushed it open, and what I encountered inside will haunt me forever. To the right, an older man's body was slumped in an armchair against the wall. His arms rested on the armrests, gripping a newspaper as if he had been reading. Strands of hair had fallen away, and the skin on his face bore the ashen hue that only death and decay can leave behind. His jaw was stiff, frozen in a lifeless grin. A pair of glasses lay atop the folded paper, as if someone had carefully positioned him that way after death. I turned to the bed opposite and saw a woman's body in a similar state of decay. She was sitting on the edge of the mattress in a nightgown, head tilted, eyes open, staring at a television emitting nothing but static. The silence was suffocating, as if I were caught in an inescapable nightmare. The stench was overwhelming. I noticed fluids staining the floor and sheets, realizing that the bodies had been there for days, possibly weeks. My legs trembled. My blood ran cold. A high-pitched ringing pierced my ears. I attempted to call out to Jake, but when I turned back, I saw him cover his mouth and rush downstairs. The shock hit him instantly. I was frozen, alone, paralyzed by the scene that was not only grotesque but felt charged, as if death itself occupied that room and was watching me. Seconds dragged on like hours before I could move. Finally, I managed to shake off the paralysis. I rushed down the stairs, scarcely feeling the steps beneath me, my heart racing, a crushing weight on my chest with each breath. When I reached the ground floor, a young man, Noah, stood in the same spot, his eyes fixed on me. His lips quivered. He clutched a piece of fabric hanging from his oversized sweater. His voice was barely a whisper. "Are my parents going to be okay?" I couldn't respond. My mouth felt dry, my mind a complete blur. I stumbled outside, tripped over a rusted tire in the yard, narrowly avoiding a fall into the dirt. By the time I reached the ambulance, Jake was inside, his radio pressed tightly to his ear, calling both the police and our dispatch. Terror and disgust were etched on his face, a look I had rarely seen. We understood that resuscitation was out of the question. Our responsibility now was to alert the authorities. Minutes later, several patrol cars screeched to a halt, red and blue lights flashing across the cluttered yard. A few curious neighbors wandered closer, puzzled by the sudden activity. They watched as officers entered the house with flashlights, followed by forensic technicians and 2 reporters who slipped past the tape. One by one, they emerged, forearms shielding their noses, faces contorted in horror. Eventually, they led Noah to a squad car, his wrists cuffed, his gaze vacant. He looked terrified and lost, whispering to himself words that were indecipherable. An officer remarked that the young man displayed signs of a severe mental disorder and would be taken for psychiatric evaluation. After being questioned, Tom and I were required to stay nearby to give our statements. We stood beside the silent ambulance, observing the flow of evidence bags and listening to the rapid clicks of cameras hunting for the next big story. Finally, a detective allowed us to leave. We drove back toward the hospital in silence, each of us trapped in our own thoughts. That night, when I finally got home, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I relived the sight of those bodies and Noah's hollow stare over and over, as vivid as if I were still inside that cursed house. Days later, we learned the investigation had revealed that the young man, Noah, suffered from an advanced form of schizophrenia. Forensic specialists determined he had spent weeks living alongside his parents' corpses, which he had murdered after obeying the voices in his head. In his delusion, he believed they were still alive. He washed them, dressed them in fresh clothes, and arranged them in front of the television so they could, in his mind, share a daily routine. The house, according to detectives, was filled with unwashed dishes, outdated prescriptions for antipsychotics, and plastic containers holding a foul-smelling liquid. The moment we stepped inside, we could sense the atmosphere. From that day forward, my life took a drastic turn. I experienced a fear unlike anything I had felt before, one that transcended the typical sights of blood or grim scenes at accident sites. This was something different, twisted and sinister, defying logic. Each time I went out on a night call, I would scan the shadowy streets, feeling that any home could conceal a secret just as horrifying, if not worse. I began to have recurring nightmares of human figures sitting silently in the dark, their skin gaunt, eyes locked onto me. In the subsequent nights, I found it difficult to sleep. I started locking my bedroom door, something I had never done prior. I felt as though I was afraid of something or someone emerging from the shadows to claim me. I sought therapy, where specialists indicated that I was suffering from post-traumatic anxiety and recommended taking a few days off for recovery. However, in my line of work, time doesn't halt, and emergencies continue to occur. I decided to keep working, despite the lingering memory that haunted me. The hospital felt the impact too. During multiple overnight shifts, colleagues who were aware of the situation approached me for details, only to regret their inquiries later. As weeks went by, the curiosity faded, but an uneasy tension hung in the atmosphere whenever anyone mentioned an emergency alongside an abandoned house. Beneath every call, we sensed it. This could happen again on some forgotten back road. We never truly understand what awaits us when the phone rings, summoning us into the night. Detectives later revealed that Noah had been moved to a secure psychiatric facility after doctors noted the severity of his condition. Patrol officers murmured that during initial interrogations, he claimed his parents still communicated with him every night and that he hadn't harmed them willingly. An entity only he could perceive had compelled his actions. Whether he said this to escape culpability or because his fractured reality clouded his judgment will remain unknown. The true awareness of his parents regarding the danger they faced is also uncertain. One thing is clear: if his illness had been identified and treated promptly, none of these events would have transpired. Being a paramedic gives me a glimpse into realms that many will never see. We face the vulnerability and darkness of the human psyche. Just when you think you've experienced everything, a call like this can turn your stomach and shatter every protection you assumed kept you safe from terror. I often ponder how many more calls of that nature will attend over the course of our careers. How many narratives lie concealed behind doors of homes that appear abandoned but hold secrets we can hardly fathom. Whenever I drive along that desolate stretch on the outskirts of Phoenix, a surge of fear pierces through me. I try not to seek out the house, but it's nearly impossible not to scan the roadside, questioning whether anyone resides there now or if it stands vacant, tainted by its past. I've heard neighbors describe it as cursed, a place to steer clear of. I can't blame them. I wouldn't choose to return willingly. The suffocating silence in every nook, the odor that assaults my senses, Noah's frantic expression. They follow me like a specter during the darkest shifts. I've learned to share space with the memory, to concentrate on aiding others. But I am aware that I will never erase from my mind the night I uncovered the most grotesque secret a home can conceal. With time, I've come to terms with the fact that this experience is permanently grafted onto me. It has stolen my sleep and launched a continual struggle against the vision of those bodies positioned as if they were still alive. Words fail to convey the pain of realizing that there is nothing you can do to save them or the helplessness of confronting a madness beyond your grasp. Yet, I continue my work in the ambulance, assisting whoever requires my help, hoping to never again encounter something as horrifying. Still, every time I enter the vehicle and the siren shatters the stillness of the night, I wonder if the next call will be another tale that haunts me endlessly. My name is Jake Anderson, and I'm a paramedic in the city of Fort Collins. I've been working the night shift for nearly 7 years, during which I've encountered all sorts of tragedies and emergencies. I used to think I was ready for anything, that my mind could handle high-stakes situations and the rush of adrenaline, but an incident in 2022 forced me to rethink my understanding of life and death. Even now, I feel a shiver when I recall it. Every time I close my eyes, that night comes flooding back with such vividness that it steals my sleep and makes me question my own sanity. It was a frigid Tuesday evening. The streets were darker than usual due to malfunctioning streetlights, and the only sound was the occasional howl of the wind. Shortly after midnight, our radio crackled to life with an emergency call. We were alerted about an accident on the highway out of the city, about 20 minutes from our station. A pickup truck had overturned, and several individuals were trapped inside. As always, we gathered our equipment, activated the siren, and sped down the desolate road. My shift partner, Mark, drove with a grave look on his face, concerned that our response time would be insufficient. The road loomed ahead, dimly lit with hardly any other vehicles in sight. The radio buzzed with static. Sometimes we caught snippets of the operator's voice, but then the signal would fade, plunging us into unsettling white noise. As we passed isolated properties and homes, I attempted to maintain my composure, though deep inside I felt something was amiss. A knot in my stomach signaling an ominous premonition about what lay ahead. As we neared the accident scene, we spotted the headlights of the pickup truck mangled against a wooden fence. The front end was demolished, and the force of the crash had warped nearly the entire chassis. A few neighbors had gathered, drawn by the sound of the crash, and one of them, visibly shaken, waved us down. The ambulance's flashing lights illuminated the sight, and as I hopped out with my first aid kit, a chill coursed through me. There was something about that atmosphere that felt different from any other incident I had ever responded to. I discovered a young couple who were still conscious in the front seat. The woman was complaining of excruciating chest pain, and the man's forehead was covered in blood. The twisted metal had caught their legs. For fear of making their injuries worse, the witnesses there had not ventured to move them. I reasoned that it would be wise to work carefully to get them out without doing more harm. Together with my coworkers, I prepared to use rescue equipment and remove them gradually. I started with the woman, whose face was twisted in agony despite her best efforts to maintain composure. As she searched for a means of releasing a metal fragment that was securing her leg, I caught a glimpse of a figure in the back of the pickup truck. There appeared to be someone sitting silently in the back seat. I was struck by the fact that no one else acknowledged it. It looked like a small silhouette, presumably a girl with her seat belt fastened. She had a pale complexion and her gaze was locked onto me. She wasn't crying or appeared to be injured. Instead, she seemed to be in a peculiar state of lethargy, devoid of any signs of fear. I attempted to alert my colleagues for assistance, but they were focused on freeing the man's legs and managing the extraction equipment. I felt a strong urge to help that child, who appeared not to comprehend the chaos surrounding her. I managed to finish securing the woman and then hurried to the back door. It was jammed, but I grabbed the handle and pulled with all my might, trying to speak gently so I wouldn't frighten her. I reassured her to stay calm, telling her we would get her out and that everything would be all right, but the door wouldn't budge. I strained harder and finally dislodged part of the twisted metal. With every attempt, the pressure in my chest mounted. It felt as if something beyond the metal was resisting my efforts to get in. When the door finally opened, I turned to offer reassurance to the girl, but she felt distant, almost fading in the dimness of the vehicle. I called for Harry to come over, but he approached with a frown, asking what I was doing. The urgency in his voice startled me. I replied impatiently that there was a girl in the back seat and I needed his help to get her out. Harry looked at me in confusion, leaned in to peer inside the pickup truck, then shook his head and told me there was no one there. I wanted to argue, but a chill ran through me. Glancing back at the back seat, this time shining my flashlight inside, I found it completely empty. There were no signs or traces of anyone having been there, not even a seat belt fastened. It felt as though the girl had never existed. My colleague placed a hand on my shoulder and urged me to calm down. His expression was filled with concern, as if he thought I was suddenly imagining things. I finished helping the couple, who fortunately only had moderate injuries, and we got them into the ambulance. The man was still bleeding but seemed stable, and the pain was causing the woman to gasp. That image of the girl kept coming back to me, making it difficult for me to think clearly. Maybe fatigue was getting to me, I told myself, that I had been tricked by the darkness. However, I knew in my heart that what I had witnessed was true, as genuine as the twisted metal, the blood, and the suffering of the injured individuals already inside the ambulance. While my colleagues monitored the couple's vital signs, the man locked eyes with me, reflecting a blend of anguish and a peculiar sparkle. I felt a strong urge to look away, yet something made me inquire whether they were traveling with anyone else. Summoning the courage to speak, I expressed my concern about a girl I had spotted in the back, wanting to ensure she wasn't trapped. The woman's complexion instantly drained of color. The man tightened his fists and swallowed hard, pulling a wrinkled photograph from his wallet. His voice trembled as he asked whether the girl I had seen looked like the one in the picture. It depicted a small, smiling girl around 6 years old, sporting straight hair and a bow. The figure I had sensed matched perfectly. Pressure built in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I silently nodded, unsure of how to respond. Then the woman broke down in tears, explaining that their daughter had passed away months prior due to a congenital heart condition, and sometimes they felt her presence as if she were still with them. A cold shiver coursed through me. I remained speechless, unable to find the right words to soothe the bewildered parents or to make sense of what I had seen. I simply nodded, burdened with guilt for awakening such profound grief. They wept, while I tried to keep my composure, my heart racing. Harry exchanged a serious glance with me and suggested I move to the front to collect my thoughts, which I did. I settled into the passenger seat, staring at the dark road ahead and listening to the couple's uneven breathing. A tingling sensation traveled through my arms, my mind still fixated on the image of the girl, so lifelike, so real, with her seat belt fastened, as if waiting for someone to save her. I searched for a rational explanation. Maybe it was a reflection, a mirage induced by the flashlight and my fatigue, but her face remained etched in my memory too vividly. As we journeyed back, I tried to convince myself it had merely been a trick of perception. Yet the stillness of the night felt imbued with something deeper. I felt as though that presence continued to linger with me, suspended in the air of the ambulance. Or perhaps it was fear itself consuming me from within, causing me to question the line between reality and the impossible. When we reached the hospital, we gently lowered the couple and turned them over to the emergency personnel. As they tended to their injuries, I stood for a moment in the hallway, my eyes fixed on the floor tiles. I sensed that reality was a heavy burden on my shoulders. A doctor inquired if I was okay. I nodded, lacking the desire to elaborate. I made my way to the station where the rest of the team appeared tense and worried. Some of them asked what was going on. I simply shook my head and climbed into the ambulance to ensure all the equipment was in order. Alone in the unit, I was enveloped by an unsettling atmosphere. A fleeting memory of the girl in the back seat surfaced. In that moment, I felt compelled to look back again, hoping to find everything as it should be. But when I shone the light from my flashlight, my heart raced at what I saw on the stretcher. There was a slight impression in the mattress, as if someone had carefully settled there. My mind screamed that it couldn't be true, that we had jostled the stretcher to adjust it, and that the indentation shouldn't exist. Yet there it was, appearing too fresh to be a simple coincidence. My pulse quickened. For a moment, I struggled to catch my breath. I reached out to touch that dent, hoping it would disappear upon contact. It did vanish, but I felt an eerie sense that at any moment it might reappear, reminding me that something inexplicable had transpired that night. I exited the ambulance with shaky legs, feeling my strength waning. The rest of the early morning passed in silence, with me unwilling to discuss the matter further. My co-workers sensed my unease, though no one dared to inquire too deeply. As time went on, operations resumed their usual rhythm. There were other emergency calls, different patients and standard procedures, but I couldn't shake the image of the girl from my mind, nor could I ignore the fact that her family recognized her photograph. I attempted to pray, telling myself to remain professional and composed. Nevertheless, something within me would never return to the way it was before. When my shift ended, I walked out to the parking lot, a lump lodged in my throat. The sun was beginning to rise, and the first beams illuminated the vehicles, casting a golden hue on everything they touched. I found myself gazing at my own shadow, pondering whether there was something or someone else beside me. A shiver ran through me as I remembered that silent stare, those eyes that seemed to plead for help. I couldn't even comprehend if the girl was asking for refuge or if, in some way, she remained trapped in that traumatic event. Guilt tormented me, thinking that perhaps she had held on to me in that moment. As weeks went by, I attempted to rid myself of the paranoia, but the impression of that night lingered. I turned to a priest and shared, without too many specifics, that I had experienced something unexplainable. He suggested that I seek solace through prayer, aiming to provide peace for the spirit of whoever had suffered. He also recommended that I keep holy water in the ambulance for spiritual protection. As unbelievable as it may seem, I took his advice to heart. More than once, I felt a chill during my shifts, and my first instinct is to sprinkle a bit of holy water, as if that could drive away the shadows that linger on the night roads. Regardless, I persist in my work because saving lives is my true passion. Nonetheless, what transpired that night made me realize that there are truths beyond our understanding. There are moments when the boundary between life and death blurs, allowing the impossible to seep into our reality. As I pass by the broken vents where the accident took place, my heart races, and I tighten my grip on the steering wheel. I recall the image of that girl, her vacant stare, and her unsettling silence, followed by the completely empty back seat. Every night before starting my shift, I look at the ambulance with a newfound respect that I didn't possess before. Within those narrow passages and the wail of the siren, I have encountered the most terrifying experience of my life. Perhaps I will never witness anything like that again. Or perhaps I will, as encounters with the unknown can arise when you least expect them in this line of work. Many of my colleagues recount supernatural tales that have been handed down through generations. I was skeptical until this incident occurred. Now, when someone tells me they sense something unusual during a rescue or in the back of the ambulance, I no longer dismiss them so readily. I choose to listen and provide support. Through the years, I've come to understand that not everything has a concrete explanation, and that sometimes we paramedics bear not only the burden of aiding the living but also the longing of souls seeking peace. Occasionally, their last glimmer of hope lies in that flashing light and the uniform that signifies help. This account, as strange as it may seem to someone who hasn't experienced it, continues to influence my nights. There are times when I shut my eyes and feel the chill of that accident, the girl's gaze, and the conviction that in that instant, I witnessed something beyond this realm. Years of experience offer no solace, and the dread that haunts you originates from a place that eludes understanding. I merely strive to coexist with it, aware that I confront a mystery that transcends the physical, a mystery that will follow me until my final heartbeat. Because ultimately, death isn't simply a door that closes behind you. Sometimes, something lingers amidst the twisted metal and uncried tears, a whisper that roams in the shadows, a back seat that isn't entirely cleared, and a gaze that transcends the limits of comprehension. I will never forget that still silhouette in the dimness of the pickup truck, nor the certainty that for a brief moment, she was right in front of me, as tangible as the pulsing terror that still keeps me from sleeping.